Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
No, I'm Reid.
And on today's episode, we get back with Kyla to speak about her, I called it a side gig, but
Wait. I'm not letting you off that easy. Say her last name.
hang on. I gotta look. Oh, Mittal.
There you go. I don't know what you were looking up.
I was down in my notes about the rest of the episode. Reid was giving me a hard time because we record 2 episodes with Kyla at the same time, but we're posting them, a month or so apart. And I just, of course, flubbed her last name because I wanted to call it like
toy manufacturer.
Mittal. Yeah. Which, by the way, are they still on top, or are those guys like?
I'm sure they are. Just a question of globally, where do they sit?
Yeah. Well, because I know Hasbro has had some ups and downs in the last decade.
The gummy bears?
Anyway, what's that?
The gummy bears?
No, Hasbro. Isn't Hasbro? Aren't they like
they
dolls?
make great gummy bears.
No way. They're gummy bears and action figures?
No. We'll find out. I can see you're searching.
Hang on. Who makes gummy bears?
Poor Kyla. We're usually quicker on the intro.
Haribo.
Okay. Well,
yeah. See, close. Hasbro is like Nerf guns, and Disney Princess. There you go.
All right.
And then
the other one's touche.
How dare you?
Just trying to throw you on tilt.
Yeah, well, good luck at that. All right, so Kyla Mittal also participates in an organization that does secret shopping for possible fair housing, discrimination, or violations. I know that you and I, you in particular, Reid, but I'll say both of us were super curious about this, just to speak to a secret shopper, and of course, because fair housing is top of mind for us right now with all the things that we have going on. So what did you think about the conversation?
I thought it was great. She's only a year into it, so I can't wait to circle back with her after, hopefully she sticks with it a couple more, because I think she's going to have some great anecdotes. But the whole undercover thing, in any realm for me is fascinating. So makes me now wonder, is Kyla Mittal her real name?
Right. What they do when she wouldn't tell us what organization she's with?
Yeah.
Can't tell you.
But from the questions that she asked to the way that it starts, like how she's, communicated with to, what she does or doesn't learn about it afterwards. And then ultimately how things progress. So there's plenty that we weren't able to unpack, but the stuff that we were able to get at, I thought was really interesting. And I can tell Kyla's probably going to be, one of the standards like within the industry. I told her she's going to end up in the FBI, but we'll see.
Well, I thought it was super cool because, like you said, it's like if she's touring on site, then she actually wears a wire. She's like, and she's nervous about where she puts the recording unit so that it doesn't get spotted, which I can only understand how nervous she must get with that, because anytime that you're doing something that someone else doesn't know about, it's like, oh, they're totally going to catch me. Right. Like if I'm taking a photo of someone, I'm like, everyone knows I'm taking a photo. It's like, nobody really pays attention about what you're doing with your phone these days, right? And I feel like the same unit, like if she's got like a tape recorder in her pocket, someone probably just thinks like, oh, that's a cell phone. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, totally. Well, I am going to warn our audience. David is developing quite a reputation for taking pictures when people aren't looking. He's done that with me about 80 times since we started the business. So,
you think I take more than you take?
Oh my God. Are you kidding me? Like without me knowing? Yes. When my phone's out because that thing's like, the size of a laptop. Of course I broke it and finally have a normal size phone now, but
dude, I was wondering why you got the new case. It's not a new case. It's a new phone.
Yeah. It dropped out of my hand when I was at Home Depot, and like literally I could have dropped it 100 more times and not broken it, but it landed perfectly flat on its face and was able to bust up the screen. So sucks.
Wow. Well, I don't know how many secret photos I take. I feel like other people in the company are taking far more photos than we take. Although I did try to get a shot of our quarterly planning this time, although that wasn't so secret. It was like pretty obvious that I
Yeah,
took
you were like in mid sentence, and then suddenly you stopped and like rolled your chair back and tried to get zoom out. That's
well, you
pretty
know what's
obvious.
we do all this team building stuff, and we always forget to get phones
I know.
get pictures. But we just did. We rented out the theater and watched Jurassic Park, and we took 0 photos of the event.
Terrible. Yep.
Yeah, they're the worst.
All right. Well, Kyla, it was a good conversation. I do think it's worth listening to, and it is pretty focused when we get to the episodes. Trust us.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like this is only the first of many secret shopping episodes, because I want to go get some other secret shoppers, not just fair housing folks, but just generally speaking.
Totally.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, if it sounds interesting, then stay tuned. Okay, Kyla. Well, welcome back to the Digible Dudes podcast. I know both Reid. I will speak for Reid here. We are super excited about this. I don't know if you want to call it like a side gig of yours, but you also do some fair housing secret shopping. So maybe describe that for us, like what this means for you, what that's like, and then is it a side gig, or how frequent do you get to partake of this particular endeavor?
Yeah, that is correct. I would also classify it as a side gig. It's really on a case-by-case basis whenever discrimination complaints are filed. So it's not really ever a set schedule. It's just kind of when the need is there, then I kind of step in and do my thing.
Right. So what happens? You're hanging out. It's COVID times right now. You're working from home probably most of the time, unless you're trying to place someone in an affordable housing unit. But then you get an email or a call that says, hey, I need you to go check out this one property. But walk us through what that looks like.
Right. So I usually just get a brief report of the property and kind of what I'm supposed to specifically inquire about when looking for an apartment. Sometimes this requires me to pretend to be somebody that I'm not. And then I go in, during COVID, I usually do it over the phone, and I will just act like I'm a regular prospective tenant inquiring about an apartment. And then usually I have specific questions that I need to ask, such as what their application fees are, how they feel about families with children, something very specific like that. And then I write a report on what they say.
So are you given almost like, here's your character, like you're Jane Smith, and here's some other stuff you should drop on the call? Or like when you go in person, if you do go in person, or like how fleshed out is it for you versus you're just given like, go be who you want to be, show up, and then write this report?
It's very specific. I mean, I have my name that I'm supposed to say, even an address and an email in case they inquire about those things. So it's pretty comprehensive. And like everybody that's in my family, my monthly income, my employer, it's very detailed.
I feel like you have more on your fake self than I could give on my real self if I was to try to rent an apartment right now. What's my income? Let me email Reid. I'm not sure.
I definitely need it to be like as close to my actual self as possible so I can remember these things, because otherwise you're right. I'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah, totally. They call you by name when you're on the phone with them, and you're like, excuse me, who? Oh, that's right. This is me. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you're given basically, let's say, like an index card of material. You then may call them, and then you may probably do a virtual tour of something of a particular unit. You may even go in and meet with them. And then sounds like there's like a series of 4 or 5 questions that you're expected to be able to answer and write into your report whenever you finish the process.
Correct. Yeah. So the most common that I usually get is questions around familial status. So usually I'll pretend to have a son or daughter, and then just have to somehow mention that in conversation and see how they react to it. Other times it is related to security deposits or application fees to make sure they're not charging, like outrageous fees for some folks. But it's kind of funny because a lot of times I have this whole detailed report and then most of it doesn't even get brought up. So.
You mean like brought up in your report or brought up when you're actually doing the secret shopping?
In conversation with the leasing agent. So like I have like an employer and a monthly income, for example, and usually like I've never been asked about that.
That's super interesting. So are you given like, how far do you get to take this? Like, is it only the preliminary call, or is it like, how do you know when to stop and say, all right, I've got enough for my report? Because at some point, if you had actually like applied for the apartment, right, that they would have asked you for some of that information.
Right. So I don't fill out any paperwork. So it's really just like me being a prospective tenant, and that's kind of it. You know, I get questions like at the end of my tour, like, oh, would you like to fill out an application? Would you like to, you know, do X, Y, or Z? And I'll just usually reply like, oh, no, I'm still thinking about it. I have other places to look at or something like that. So it's very preliminary. It's definitely more about how they treat prospective applicants looking at their property rather than current tenants.
Got it. And I have two quick things, and then I'm sure Reid has a number of follow-ups that he wants to hit. One is like, it sounds like you bow out at the end. Like, so you basically do one call or one visit, and then you'll be like, I have enough for my report. So for any follow-up emails or phone calls, are you even providing that information on your fake self where they may start trying to call you? And if so, like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, so usually, sometimes I'll give a phone number or my like fake email if they ask for it, just so that it's not obvious that I'm a secret shopper. But I will record if they do follow up. So that is part of it. So, even if they don't answer the phone, that's something that I'll record to see that they're being consistent across tenants. So yes, sometimes I will provide that information. I won't respond to them, but I'll track if they do give me those follow-ups.
Got it. And then the report, I feel like in our pre-call, you were saying that you just are more of like a data collector. I'm just curious, how well versed, is this like playing a game of Operation where like you are giving them this like answers, but it sounds like you don't try to like trick them into doing something not good, right? You're not saying like, hey, by the way, you didn't ask me, but you should know I've got a family with 11 children, right? And then like, you're not trying to do stuff like that, but I'm just curious if you're more of the data collector and you're passing this report on, do you feel like you have a good handle on when someone may be crossing the line? And, you know, when you sort of sense that they may be getting close to something, you know, inappropriate, a direction they shouldn't be going, how do you react to that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I do feel like I'm more of a data collector. I mean, usually I don't even know what the complaint was that was filed. I don't know any of that information. I'm just told, go to this place, ask them something. And then I just record what they say. So usually discrimination is not blatant. You know, it's very subtle. And so I don't think I've ever come across a case where I'm like, wow, like that was really rude or that was blatant discrimination. Like I've never experienced that. And so it's more like, are you being consistent across all tenants rather than are you going to like trip yourself up? But that's correct. Like I don't ever try and trick them. I don't try and lead them into saying certain things. I simply ask what I need to ask or say what I need to say and then record exactly how they respond.
Got it. Reid, this makes me think immediately, like all of these lead scoring systems that are like hitting the industry, right? That you get a phone call and it's providing the agent with like, hey, the lead score is a 72, right? That's happening these days, maybe more for your information, Kyla. That way people can say like, oh, this lead score is a 72 versus I have a second phone call that's hitting me at the same time where the lead score is a 30. And so it's like, well, obviously focus on the 72 versus the 30. But Reid, it reminds me of that book you and I have talked about, Weapons of Math Destruction, where it's like if you teach the system wrong, like with the wrong data points, that it may be inadvertently not being consistent across people, right? Because you have this one lead score that's a 72, and what if the training data on that included some, you know, fair housing, you know, at-risk categories or demographic information when it was making that determination versus the person that scored a 30? You could, maybe it's not a human problem, but it's really your lead scoring system that may be causing could cause you an issue if you don't know how that's working or what data it's considering.
Yeah, totally. All right. My turn.
Yeah, you're up.
Well, it surprised me when you said that most of the complaints were familial status or security deposits. I would have assumed, but since then you've already talked about it being very mild or subtle, I guess, discrimination, but that sexual orientation or ethnicity and things like that, that I think most people associate more commonly with discrimination would have been the bulk of the complaints. So that's not something that comes up too often.
I mean, not anything that I've experienced. I mean, obviously it's different over the phone. Like you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell those things just from having a phone conversation with somebody. But when I was going in person, obviously I know my race was a factor as a non-white woman. But I wasn't specifically being asked about those types of things or like having to have a conversation with them about that, because I feel like it's more indirect. And, discrimination in general is extremely difficult to quantify. It's hard to really pinpoint. And so that's kind of why organizations like mine exist, is to track data over a long period of time to establish a pattern.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely what I want to unpack a little bit more. So it seems to me that one of the things you need to identify or validate that discrimination is occurring is comparison. So, and I am going to use race in this case, but a white woman to go in and, potentially lease an apartment versus a non-white woman, if they're treated different, how that's captured versus something that's more of a data point, like you said, which is far easier, which is, the security deposit or familial status, things like that. And that leads me to, is there any consideration, or is it illegal, I guess, to have any kind of body cam or anything like that to identify, cases like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually, when I do in-person visits, I wear a wire basically. So I directly record the exact conversation that we have, which is legal in the state of Colorado. So I think, to me, when I think about discrimination about like sexual orientation or race or some of those more like indirect qualities, I think it's definitely more manifested in kind of how people are treated in person too, because it's like, if a white person comes in, are they automatically going to be offered a lower deposit or a longer lease term or even a lower rent rate or have better customer service or just like little things like that, which helps us establish whether or not discrimination actually occurred in that case.
Right. And then what's the timeline when you get the call, so to speak? I'm thinking of you as like a Mission Impossible. I don't know why, but I got the call, right? And then the message expires. But do you go in the next day? Do you go in a week later? Because I would think that, not that somebody be tipped off, but I guess it wouldn't. But yeah, what's the typical turnaround from the time you get the call to visiting the property?
Usually 48 hours.
Okay.
I'll try and go really quickly. And in some cases, I've actually gone back to the same property multiple times to follow up with them. And if I talk to different leasing agents, then that can be used in comparison on how my experience was with one person versus another.
Yeah. Well, then next question, kind of going through the full cycle, is you come back and then confirm. So one question is, how frequently are you confirming? Versus, is it 90% of the time it's just in somebody's head, or just the opposite? 90% of the time it wasn't in their head, there is discrimination happening. So curious what the normal percentage is, or if you have any idea of that, because I know you're not exposed to all the data and all that. So do you have a handle on, I'm sure for yourself you do, but just curious when it comes to these cases, what the percent of verifications are?
Yeah. So to be honest, I don't know, and I don't have access to that data. And I think that's pretty intentional, just because, they want their testers to be as unbiased as possible and be able to accurately collect what actually happened. So I am not sure kind of what that ratio is. And all I know is that any of my reports can be subpoenaed for court use at any time. But outside of that, I have no information with what happens next or where my report goes or who looks at it or any information like that.
Yeah, well, that was my next question is what happens if you get on the naughty list? You know, you mentioned having a few properties that you had to go back to multiple times. And so, where it goes from there as far as, escalation. But you don't have any, I guess, context on that?
I don't. I mean, I'm assuming that at some point, like if enough evidence has been created or collected, including like all my reports, that would be submitted to a judge. But I really don't know kind of what goes on outside of my report submission.
Yeah, sure. Well, my last question is more anecdotal. Your very first time, were you nervous? Have you ever felt like your cover was blown, like FBI agent, which by the way, Kyla, this is where you're headed. I don't know if you know that, but you'll be undercover in no time. As long as not too many people listen to this episode. But yeah, talk us through, I don't know if you have a fun one or if you can just reflect back. I don't even know how long you've been doing this, but the first time, if you had some nerves and if you ever felt like they were onto you.
Yeah, I've been doing this for about a year, and there have been moments, like honestly, when I was going in person, it was like how to hide the recorder because it's like a little rectangle. So I was like, do I put it in my pocket? Like, is that too obvious? Oh my gosh, like they'll see it, they'll know, which is like kind of the main thing that I had to worry about. But I was nervous just because it's like, oh my gosh, what if I forget to ask one of the things that I'm supposed to ask? Then I'll have to do this all over again. And also just accurately remembering what happened. We have to be super detailed in our reports down to like the physical description of the person we were talking to. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I don't remember how tall they are. I was so nervous about asking about the rent or something like that. One thing is I have been in like so many nice apartment complexes, like nicer than I can afford now. And so like pretending to like go in there and look at these super nice complexes has been really fun for me because I'm like, oh my gosh, look at your gym, look at your pool, all your amenities. And then I get to pretend like I can actually live there.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, last question for me. You mentioned that these are predominantly, if not all, applicants. And so is there a different protocol system that happens for residents? Because I would think that there's as many, if not more, complaints filed from current residents than applicants, and just didn't know who takes those.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question that I don't 100% know the answer to. I know that there are multiple agencies in Colorado that investigate these sorts of complaints, including the state of Colorado. Their Civil Rights Division does investigate claims. So I would also assume that there's a slightly different process for current residents versus applicants, but I primarily deal with the applicant side.
Yeah. Well, see, you need to start pitching for the resident side, because then you can just go ahead and move in. It's like, this is part of my job. I have to stay at super posh like apartments for months on end to make sure that you guys are in compliance.
Yeah. Reid, it's funny. It's like all I can think of right now is like, I don't know why it's been on the brain recently, but you have all these malpractice cases from doctors and healthcare, right? And if like how much on pins and needles people in the healthcare industry must be to be like, shoot, am I going to get named in some suit because of something that happened and I'm on 18 hours of sleep or whatever, 18 hours of no sleep. Well, I feel like I obviously I've not been a property manager or a leasing agent before, but in some ways it's like it's a small version of this for them, right? They don't know if someone like Kyla is going to walk in and record them. Like this may be their first job and they've only been on the job for 3 months and they're expected to never slip up, right, on any of these secret shopping things. And then, and a lot of this stuff can be totally inadvertent. And I know like the big management companies require people to go through annual trainings, but an annual training is tough, right? Like I remember like, I had a buddy that was like, he was working a cash register at a gas station in Texas. And it's like he, obviously had to check ID whenever someone would buy cigarettes. And he actually got busted in a sting, not because he didn't mean to check the ID, but basically someone had given him a fake ID with the wrong birth date. or whatever. And he was like on hour 14 of his shift and he missed it. And then he got fined and, his job was at risk. So all I'm saying is like, what a tough job. Like, obviously this is very important work, but also like looking at it from the property manager, leasing agent, side of things. When you're one of two people at the property and you have 100 Amazon packages, you got to get to the right place and the water's flooding on the second floor or whatever. And then it's like, you could just mess up. So you have to be like super dialed in, and it's just going to take a lot of practice for someone to not accidentally slip up. But at the same time, I feel like there's probably not enough Kylas out there doing this, right? Because like, I just feel like there's probably a lot of things like, I think in your notes, Kyla, you had said like there was a new fair housing law coming into effect in January in Denver where you can't do any sort of income discrimination. Yeah. I know in certain counties in Colorado, you can't even like political party is something you can't do anything about. So maybe I'll just leave this very open-ended for you to talk about any of that stuff or anything that we may have missed. And I'm just going to sit here and empathize, like what a tough job, because I don't have anybody recording me to see if I mess up or slip up on a word or two.
Sure, yeah.
That you know of.
Yeah, I mean, we honestly look at other factors. Like when I was going in person to do these visits, we would look like, do you have a fair housing sign displayed in your office? Even like something as simple as that. But I agree, it can be really tough to, remember all of the covered groups of fair housing, and you might treat somebody differently and it has absolutely nothing to do with discrimination. So it's really hard to kind of navigate that, and I totally understand. But yeah, I would assume and expect that next year we might get more complaints specifically related to income, because as you just mentioned, there is a new law statewide going into effect January 1st, basically preventing landlords from discriminating against source of income. So that includes rental assistance vouchers. Another big one was like student loans or financial aid. A lot of folks were getting denied because that's how they were going to pay for their housing. So obviously, for my line of work, we're most excited about that. Vouchers can be now accepted statewide, but again, it's super hard to enforce in practice, and there's a lot of steps that would have to happen in order for a landlord to be like reprimanded for that sort of thing. So that's kind of where I'll step in and just continue collecting data on that, which I would expect to increase next year.
Yeah, well, that's I see Reid has something to comment there, but your point about student income, like I have a friend in New York City. He's going to school, and there's a trust that funds his housing and his tuition. And when he went to go get his apartment, they were like, well, we need to see your income. He's like, well, I'm a student, so there is no income. And at first they weren't going to allow him to get the apartment. And it's supposed to be a student apartment. And so he had to go get a cosigner that had like three times the annual rent as their income, so that he could actually move in. So you make a great point for all of the folks like in the other organization that you support that's placing people in affordable housing. If you have vouchers or if you have some other program or if you're a student, that is going to have some major implications and would be super hard to catch, because as a student, I wouldn't know, right? Like I wouldn't know that like if someone said, oh, shoot, you need to make $85,000 a year. And I'd be like, oh, I don't make $85,000 a year. I would probably just like tuck tail and run. I'd probably go somewhere else. So anyways, Reid, I'll let you make your comment.
Less of a comment, just a question. Again, referring to my sister, one of the things that I came to appreciate, learn is one of the harder parts of nonprofit is, you don't always get the immediate gratification. Things, when you're talking about big change, socioeconomic, things like this, it's usually a grind, and it can be years and years before you really notice or can point to a substantial difference. So I was just curious to hear your perspective on that. You mentioned that you don't get exposure to all the data, which I don't know if that frustrates you, but Dave and I both are very data driven. And so we'd be looking for those results. I'm curious what gives you satisfaction, what you draw on to stay motivated and inspired, and do you see yourself staying in this, subset of nonprofit for the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it is a tough work, especially being in the field sometimes. But as I said in the other episode with my work related to affordable housing, it feels good to invest in the community. And that's really what my main motivator is really understanding that, I can't change the world, but I can change this person's world. And that makes me really happy and definitely motivates me to keep doing this sort of work. And I know it's not cut and dry, and I would love to know more about like the policy and the data behind it, because the data doesn't lie about the success of these programs. And although it is really difficult to track, I think that it's still always going to continue to be really important work.
Yeah, no doubt. Totally agree with you. So are you wanting to move up the chain, so to speak? I mean, it sounds like you mentioned in the last episode, it's a pretty good sized chapter here, around 30 people. And you mentioned different divisions and, management, et cetera. So this is just me curious about you, Kyla.
I never pictured myself going into the affordable housing industry, but now that I'm here, I really am enjoying it. In terms of like where I would see myself going is I'm definitely interested in more of the policy end and would love to get more involved in just like the government side and how they manage and delegate agencies to manage these programs for them. And just understanding like the implications of affordable housing on a broader scale and more about what the barriers are for landlords and the incentives kind of surrounding that. So that's kind of where I see myself going. But I really do like the affordable housing industry so far.
Yeah, well, very cool. They're lucky to have you. I'll say we, because we're in the industry at large, but you seem to be in it for all the right reasons, have a great head on your shoulders, so they're lucky to have you.
Well, thank you.
What's really cool about that is, Reid, we had Ryan Cohen on as a broker, and when we were asking him about things that needed more attention, or like that he had an interest in, it was more around the policy side of things and the government side of things. And in particular, I think in the last episode, Kyla, you were talking about some of the tax credit options that people like that builders or lease up communities could get involved with. And that was like one of his angles. He was saying like, this is totally like underappreciated, at least here in the Denver metro area, and something that, there's a lot, there's a lot to be done. So I just think it's super cool. At least that two of the local folks that we've had on feel like such a passion for this, because I like the way that you put it, Kyla, like even if you can't change the entire world, you can change one person's world, right? And if you start to get involved in that policy side of things, you obviously make even a bigger impact on the Front Range.
Yes, I hope so.
Cool. Well, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate just your time and being willing to share your experiences. And I'm sure we'll be checking in with you sometime in the future over the next year. So definitely reach back out to us as you have more things you share or want to bring awareness to, because this is a terrific topic.
Great. Thank you so much. And ditto, feel free to always reach out to me.